Today on Spotlight, a look back at a case that is nearly 10 years old and is still working its way through the maze of our legal system. If you were around in 2005, you probably remember the tragic Lake St. George boating accident in New York involving senior citizens from Southeast Michigan. If you don't remember, some reports from our Action News archives will probably jog your memory. Coming out of those reports, defense attorney Ven Johnson will tell us where that case stands today. And later on our Sunday morning program, we'll talk to the leader of Stand Up for Democracy. It's Sunday, March the 11th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight.
In the small village of Lake George, where everybody knows everybody else, Matt Quirk and his family have emerged as its most famous or infamous residents. It's a designation that came to them when 47 people boarded their boats and only 27 returned alive.
Bill and Carol Gilson were among the 20 people who died when the Ethan Allen sunk on Lake George 5 months ago.
The law needs to reinforce what justice is supposed to be in this country.
Ron Zdrojewski read the police report and doesn't believe the investigation was conducted properly, and furthermore simply appalled the Warren County Sheriff's Department never sought criminal charges. On the phone, I spoke with the Warren County Sheriff, who told me he does not believe Mr. Zdrojewski understands the law. The point, he does not think that there is anything criminal in New York State statute to charge here. And furthermore, he says this is the arena for civil cases.
And joining me on Spotlight now is Ven Johnson of Johnson Law. And he's going to be talking about a fascinating case that a lot of Michiganders have probably forgotten. Ven, welcome to Spotlight.
Good morning, Chuck. How are you?
It's good having you.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Paint the picture of this case, because while some people who've been around this area for a long time may remember the circumstances when it was a big news story,
right.
It's been a good little while, and people tend to forget after a little bit of time.
Yes, sir. Chuck, back in October of 2005, a number of the senior community groups across the Detroit metropolitan area kind of got together, got a couple of big tour buses, and went out east for a fall color tour is what they were calling it. And they ultimately ended...
New York area.
Yes, sir, but actually throughout the New England area, so it's like a week-long trip. And so these folks, of course, paid, hard-earned dollars to do that. And so what they would do is go on various tours throughout the New England area, and they ended up on Lake George, New York, which is upstate New York, just a beautiful glacier-made huge lake, much like one of the Great Lakes, if you will.
Sure.
And they went out on a boat called the Ethan Allen to tour the colors and to look at the big houses and that type of thing, when in the middle of their tour on a bright sunny day, because of a number of different factors and a bunch of negligence from many different people, the boat capsized or flipped over, killing 20 people and injuring a host of others.
Now this took place way back in 2005.
Yes, sir. October 2, 2005.
It's still being litigated. Many of them hired you
yes,
as
sir.
their attorney. One, why would you stick with a case this long? I would think that would be difficult financially if everything else.
Thank you. Yes, it is extremely difficult, and it's been highly difficult process because we're going up and down through the appellate chain, not just the trial court, but the appellate court and the court, Supreme Court of New York and so forth. But the answer is because I can't allow, it's just, I guess me, but I can't give up on people. When you have gone through what these poor people went through, and I have clients, 3 of them who lived, Chuck, and I have 4 clients who died. It's destroyed hundreds of people and families across the Detroit metropolitan area, and I just can't forget that.
Is this a class action suit?
It is not, sir. And there's 27 different lawsuits kind of combined into one that started up in the federal court in Albany, New York, that now, after all these years, we're now the one and only defendant left is the state of New York, who negligently certified the boat, which I could obviously explain to you. But all the lawsuits now, right now, are simply pretty much against the state of New York.
Why is it taking so long to come to some sort of judicial resolution here?
Big lawsuits like this with this many people who have been injured or killed often take this long, is the short answer, Chuck. But again, what happens is when you have so many different factors that have kind of spilled over into this case in terms of certain companies not having insurance, certain entities enjoying what's called governmental immunity. You can't sue the government, Chuck, unless the government says you can't.
Did the people who owned the boat, did they have insurance?
Well, they thought they did, and they were
What do you mean they thought they did?
Well, they went with one of these offshore companies, and as it turns out, it was non-existent.
So they were paying premiums to a company that really wasn't insuring them?
Yes, sir.
Where is that company now? Out of business?
That company's out of business. My understanding is the state of New York assisted in some type of an insurance fraud investigation unit, and whoever this company was is long gone, living somewhere else in a different country.
In a nutshell, what caused the boat to sink?
The National Transportation Safety Board concluded a number of factors, but really the short answer is the instability of the boat. The state of New York each year jumps on this tour boat knowing that people are paying money to go look at it, or to look at the colors and so forth, and they said, okay, well, there's a plaque on the boat which says back in 1967, 1967 said it was okay to have 50 people on this boat. So they said, oh, okay, they can have 50 people on the boat.
This was 2005.
2005, exactly the point. And what we found out through
So
this...
the standards hadn't changed.
Hadn't changed, Chuck, in years. In fact, the average person that was on a boat back when the boat was first certified in 1967 was 140 pounds. The average American now, as we all know, has gone up over 20 pounds. So the state of New York, Chuck, said you can have 50 people on this boat when the testing after the fact proves they should have had 14. 14 people could be on that boat safely.
And how many did they have again?
47 and the captain, 48.
All right. So if they thought they had insurance, the people who owned the boat, turned out where they didn't have insurance, how do these people get compensated? Where does the money come from if that turns out to be the verdict?
That particular part of the case against the company that owned has been resolved, and unfortunately because of confidentiality agreements and so forth, I can't really go into that part. But the part that's left that we're still litigating in the appellate courts in New York, and hopefully someday a trial, is how did the state of New York have a gentleman in this particular case go on the boat and do nothing more than look at a plate that says, oh yeah, back in 1967, somebody said you could have 50 people on this boat, and rubber stamp and simply let it go, end up killing 20 people, Chuck, and injuring hosts of others.
Then hang on for just a second. And when we come back, I'll ask Attorney Ven Johnson whether or not you can sue the state of New York and expect to win. We'll be right back. So, Ven Johnson, at this point, you're really suing the state of New York.
Yes, sir.
Can you sue a government?
The answer is, under governmental immunity, you can't unless you fit into one of many exceptions. We are bringing this case within one of those exceptions, saying that the person who certified, the state inspector, was doing his job in his official capacity, but it was a ministerial thing. In other words, all he was supposed to do was his job, and he didn't do his job. His job was to do one thing: make sure that you know how many people can safely ride on this boat. And he didn't do it, plain and simple. So the appellate court so far, Chuck, we're 2 for 2. They've backed us up and say, no, you guys, you have a valid lawsuit. This gentleman did not do his job. He did not know how many people could safely be on the boat. In other words, 14 instead of 50. And so therefore, you should go to trial. And that's where we're at right now. We're confident that the Supreme Court of New York will ultimately say that that's exactly the way it should be.
Why are you so confident? Oftentimes, politics plays a role in things, even within judicial circles, even when you have Lady of Justice is supposedly supposed to be blind. Essentially what you're doing is you're suing the state of New York. The judges, the Supreme Court, are paid by the state of New York. It's not in their best interest to rule against the state of New York, is it?
you're 100% right, and welcome to my world, by the way. It happens in Michigan as well and all across the United States. But in fairness, when you have judges like that we've been fortunate to draw in New York so far.
And are these judges, excuse me, are these judges that have lifetime appointments, or are these judges in New York that have to run for these offices?
Usually they have to run for offices, but the fact of the matter is when you have a judge presiding over a case like this, Chuck, could politics enter into it? And their answer is, of course it can. But so far, we've been really, really fortunate because these judges take this extremely seriously. And this, again, think of, you've got literally 50 people, actually 47 Michiganders who come to New York to spend their tourism dollars to support the multi-jillion-dollar tourism industry in upstate New York that senselessly lost their lives needlessly.
How much are you suing for?
Well, the answer is, as I say to a jury, a lot.
I mean, give us some ballpark.
Well,
you say a lot.
For
a poor person out there, that could mean $100, but I assume we're talking millions of dollars.
Of course, and it was your loved one that died, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister. Same thing with me. That's what I do. My clients are like my families to me, my family. So if I would ask for millions of dollars for someone that went through the drowning of going underneath water, being trapped underneath the upside-down boat, literally being clawed at and struck by people struggling to live and try to breathe, Chuck, underneath the water. You should hear the stories that my clients have testified to, and it was horrible. And that's the ones who've lived. Obviously, we have 4 folks who died that I represent. The same thing. Their families all across the Detroit metropolitan family, Chuck, hundreds of peoples and families have been ruined by what they're haunted by and thinking how their loved one died underneath that canopy of the boat being trapped.
Couple quick questions. If you don't win this case, what does this mean to people traveling on these type of ventures, and what does it mean to your clients?
Well, the short answer is, obviously, if we don't win, if we lose an appeal, I would appeal on behalf of my clients if that's what they want, and they certainly do in this case. They've insisted on going all the way. Supreme Court of New York, wherever it needs to go to try to gain justice for their loved ones. But the fact of the matter is, if we ultimately lose, unfortunately, that's something that we would be stuck with, if you will. My clients would have to deal with that, but then we would obviously try to effectuate some change within New York by lobbying the government. And by the way, they've actually changed, Chuck. The state of New York has raised their standards over 20 pounds per person, per passenger on these vessels already since this tragedy, and I give them credit for that.
Do you believe that the prosecutors for the state of New York are doing all that they can to stretch this case out, hoping that either one, your clients, and I hate to be crass here, die off, and 2, that the case gets weaker the longer it goes?
That's a great question. The folks that represent the state of New York are not prosecutors in this case, they're defense attorneys, but it's the same question. The answer is, does that enters into every case with elderly victims. And it's a tragedy, but yeah, that's one of the reasons why we refuse to go away. We will fight this to the bitter end on behalf of these families and these loved ones. Exactly what you said, Chuck. Yeah, there is not that they hope people die per se, but from a pure business standpoint, they don't want to pay these people, and that's why they haven't. Plain and simple, through the present time. They should have.
Final question, is there another case anywhere in the country similar to this that you can use as an example that maybe a precedent has been set legally, judicially?
Well, this is one of the biggest maritime boat tragedies ever in United States history, so I would argue that there's probably not one like it. But there have been others. In New Orleans, for example, there was a ferry that ran amok. In Philadelphia, there was one. So there are some similarities, but because of different business entities and governmental entities and how they play, this one is highly, highly unique. And that's one of the reasons I'm proud to represent these people, Chuck, and I hope to have good news for you that these folks ultimately obtain the justice for their loved ones.
All right. Ven Johnson, thanks for coming in, bringing us up to date on this case. We'll see where it goes. We'll obviously try to talk to the other side and see what they have to say about this and why they've been fighting you for so long and so hard, and ultimately see what happens in terms of a judicial resolution.
Thank you for having me, Chuck. Appreciate it very much.